Welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of the SDN Community Voices, this weekly touch point between us and the SDN community, where we bring different voices from our community to talk about their experiences as service designers and hopefully bring something that you can bring home by the end of these 30 minutes short sessions. And today I'm very excited to bring up my friend and also speaker and lead of the coverage team for the Service Design Global Conference 2024, Oona O'Brien. And I'll just bring her in and then we just talk about it. Hello.
Hey, thanks very much for the introduction. Lovely to be
Thank
here.
you. I mean, you can introduce yourself also. I think so is better than me trying to do it. Most of the times I kind of fail miserably, so I have been trying not to do it, but I have been forgetting also to ask people to introduce themselves. So please.
Yeah, thank you. So my name's Oona, Franco-Irish service designer and UX researcher, currently finishing my final year of master's at the Glasgow School of Art in Scotland, where I'm based at the moment. And over the course of the last few years, I've traveled and moved around a lot and worked and lived in different countries, and that led me to become really passionate about the importance of adapting the different services that we use in our everyday lives for different cultural groups. And I was lucky enough to start working on that at a small scale in Canada, and that has led me to actually further this into my research work as a designer.
Yeah, and that was the theme of your talk, right? Really thinking
Yeah.
about those different cultural perspectives that you end up learning throughout your last. Was it you lived basically in one different country per year in the past?
Yeah, more or less for the last 5-ish, 6 years. I can recap them if it's relevant, but yeah, I've been moving around a lot.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I honestly never know where you are. I did ask you like the first thing when I met you back at the Service Design Global Conference, like, where are you right now? Because I have no idea, right?
Yeah.
So as you said, now you're in Glasgow, right? So we
I'm in
know that.
Glasgow, UK, hoping to stay there for a few years. So yeah, very much there at the moment.
Yeah. But how was your experience then? The conference again is your third conference right now, working with the coverage team also.
Yeah, it's been, I would say this, every year has been a massive improvement in terms of the experience that I've had, but also the work that we're able to deliver. Also, I had a dual role this year as both a speaker and, as you mentioned, leading the audiovisual coverage team. While we're at it, a huge shout out to the whole team out there. So Denise, Amin, Tero, and then all you guys from the marketing side. So I'm thinking of yourself, Felipe, and Sudeshna. Everyone did such an amazing job, and also Laura was with us. And but it wasn't always like that. Actually, it started off as a team of one for the Copenhagen conference, and that was me doing
Yeah.
both photo, video coverage, but also interviewing a lot of people. So last year was an improvement. We're starting having a team, and I was working hand in hand with Judy, who's also doing an amazing job at the partner and marketing, on the partner and marketing side. And this year we split into the two distinct teams that complement each other. So myself leading the visual coverage and interview part, and her leading the partner side and supporting with marketing. So it's been great. It's been a ride. We can still improve, but every year is more and it's getting better and better. So that's what we're aiming for.
And I think one struggle also that I remember, like from last week's Community Voices, somebody said that it was a bit of a struggle having simultaneous stages. And we had a little bit of a discussion on the pros and cons. And I think also from the covered side, it's a little bit problematic. You have like these people just running around with the big cameras going around trying to take pictures all stages. But I think we were quite hopefully successful. Hopefully the people like the pictures and videos of that.
I hope so. I mean, I'm a little biased, but I
Yeah,
would say we did
we're
do.
both a little biased, but
I would say we definitely managed this year, but yeah, I mean, with every big event, there's only so much you can plan, and this year we've been planning way ahead of schedule compared to last year's. But there are always going to be those unexpected moments, material hiccups, or people falling ill last minute, and so then we need to find someone to replace them and cover the stages, because it's really important for speakers. And I can speak from my own personal experience. You do want to take memories away from you, and that's what people are going to remember. So it's important that we definitely capture all of that. But I would definitely say that the biggest challenge for my team, at least, and I think you can probably relate to this, but is the fast turnover times that we're subjected to, because it makes loads of sense that attendees, speakers, and members alike want to quickly see the pictures. So the after the conference is probably, I would say, the toughest part for us. We're working around the clock to deliver the pictures, but pictures have been delivered now, and now I'm working on the videos. So yeah.
No, but that thing, for example, I think was nice compared to Berlin, because I had a lot of people coming to me on the second day saying, "Oh, I heard that we can get pictures. I would like to get them, because like we have the phone, so you can take a picture, but the camera is so much nicer to have that really like high quality memento to have from the conference." So it was nice, even though it was a little bit hectic for us. It was nice in the end that the result was a good thing for people. They were like excited to see the pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're touching on an important point, that is manpower, and how do you also handle the fact that we're all volunteers working side jobs. And so then we need to also be realistic as to what the expectations of people are versus our own schedules, and how we can make sure that we deliver this material in a very timely manner while also remaining sane and healthy and sleeping at night. So yeah, I think that's something that we can definitely still improve on, but we're making it work, because service designers seem to have a knack for working 3 full-time jobs at the same time.
And also being
So
very resourceful while doing that. So
yeah, we try.
I mean, we all learn from each other, and I think this is also the whole idea of this community voices. When I thought about it, was just like we have so much to learn from each other. We have so many different experiences, different social upbringings, different cultural upbringing. So it's always nice just to learn little by little from our experiences, both in the conference but also outside of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't even know what to add to that, basically, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe I can use that as a hook to talk a little bit about your talk, right? Because it goes a little bit, a lot on a little bit, a lot. It's a little bit complicated, but anyway, it goes on this topic of different cultural upbringings and generally what you expect of different services if you are throughout the world, right? So you kind of already said that came from your different, how you say, like experiences that you had throughout, but what really kind of clicked it together, per se?
I think it was just recurring frustration, right? That you're
Mm.
using services that are okay. So I'll start from the beginning, and I would just like to make a distinction between services that are expanding internationally that need to adapt what once used to be domestic to a different cultural environment. And then what we're about to get into in a little more details, I think, is the second case, which is, I call it reverse localization in my talk, when you're a domestic service that is catering to a multicultural pool of
Mhm.
customers. And so you need to address these expectations that the customers coming from a different country will have according to the different apprehensions that they had of their service back home.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a simple thing to do, and you can obviously not adapt on a case by case basis. But basically, to come back to your question, the reason why I started looking into that was because I noticed that so many of these services only pretended to offer a solution for people who were supposed to be non-local, so international, either travelers or people who were settling into the country, but were, as I was saying, only pretending to do that. And one example that I used in my talk was this official government website for a national park in Chile, which was supposed to allow you as a foreign customer to pay with your international credit card, so non-Chilean credit card. But actually, there was no way you could actually do that. Only the interface mentioned it. But once you inputted your card numbers and whatnot, your payment would just get rejected time and time
Yeah.
again. So then you need to become resourceful as
Yeah.
proper service
And is
designer.
the
Yeah.
and is as you said on your talk, the conundrum of giving it a dead end, right? What do you do at that point? Like it didn't work to put the card number 3 times in a row, and on the fourth time you're literally just maniac to try it again, because if it didn't work 3 times, it doesn't make sense. And I feel it's funny because anybody that has maybe moved to another country for a couple of years or has traveled, they always have this experience, right? So I had similar things also here in Sweden, where I was talking with somebody about language accessibility. Even though here in the Nordics they have one of the highest number percentages of English speaking in the population. For example, if you want, and it's kind of notoriously that a lot of the taxi drivers and Uber drivers, they are immigrants. So what they did was that they changed the system. So for the taxi licensing, you can do everything in English, but to get a driving license in Sweden, everything's still in Swedish, and you need the driving license in Sweden to then get the taxi license. So it's just also like the lack of seeing the whole systemic structure, right? Of seeing actually what do you have to do before you even get the taxi license. So
Absolutely. So it's considering the entire user journey, right? And unfortunately, I did mention dead ends as a concept from Lou Down from her book Good Services, but I think you're hinting at another one, which are the silos. Every part of the process are still very much siloed, so they're not communicating with each other. So
yeah,
on the surface level, you think you're addressing the problem, but the root of it, or the steps that come before or after, are still very much distinct. And that creates the problem down the line. So the user might be able to go through a certain amount of steps, but then he gets stops at a critical moment only due to the fact that he doesn't have the right elements or tools that are only domestic to complete that final step. So yeah, that was I mean, those highly frustrating experiences, as I'm sure you or some members of the audience might have experienced time and time on repeat, are the reason why I started looking into that. And I had that opportunity at my small scale, working for an insurance company in Canada, to do so and try to see in the typical user journey of a customer going through a claims experience, what would be so different if they're not from Canada, and what are the main difficulties that they would encounter while doing so? So it was a really interesting, eye-opening process, and that's something I'm furthering at the moment in my research. But yeah, a lot of different challenges come from that.
and I think it's even a bigger challenge now. We're considering globalization. So many countries have such a mix, a cultural mix, right, of people that are either the first generation, second generation, but they have the mix of, as yourself, for example, as you said, you're French Irish, so you have different cultural upbringings to begin with, and this really makes it more complex because then you cannot silo things when everything is just like so many cultures, just a big pool of different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so there's the cultural upbringing and then the individual. Those are two distinct things. But then there's also just simply the way, and I think that hints at an interesting problem. What is the definition that we're giving to culture in terms of a term? Because so many things can be put into that. But
Yeah,
what I was hinting at more in my talk was the cultural environment that defines the way you're going to use a service. So your expectations may be different. Let's say if a train is late, but also you're going to be used to using more certain types of payment methods. And so that's not very much down to the individual. It's more how the country operates at a national scale. And of course, when you're trying to adapt one single service domestically to a wide pool of audience, as we were mentioning at the beginning, you're not going to take all of the different cultural nuances and try to address them individually. It's more about noticing the patterns. Overall, from my research so far, you will have some let's say, distinct groups of difficulties that are going to be recurring ones that these foreigners are going to face when going into the service. So how do you address that? Or if they're going to be repeated frictions that you cannot address, like the unknown, how do you try to deal with this? Is it a support center, but then that can be accessible online or via call center, depending on the company's different needs and infrastructures? And of course, you also need to take that into consideration. What is possible to change within the corporation, the company, the service that you're dealing with? Because every company culture, but then a different type of culture,
yeah,
are different. And yeah, you also need to be realistic with how much can be adapted, but usually there are some points that can be worked on.
yeah. You end up having so many layers, right? Because you have like the personal culture, then you have company culture, you have like the country like you have so many like cultural levels there that in the end you cannot really take all of them into consideration. You don't have the time to see all of them, but at the same time you have to. So it's kind of a conundrum in a way that you have to balance these two aspects of seeing the whole thing, but at the same time you're working on one customer segment or something.
Yeah, you could say it's stakeholder management at this point, while taking into consideration different ecosystems. Yeah, absolutely. It's part of our job, right? We're
Yeah,
fluent
I mean
ecosystem
that's kind of
thinking.
the idea of seeing the whole picture, right? But I think it's quite a hard thing because I mean I was listening to some of the talks as I mentioned to you before we came in, and I think it's quite relatable to Alessandro's talk on the systemic change and just how some services they don't see the whole picture, then they don't realize how much they're affecting other ecosystems that are not necessarily the one directly to the one they're working on, but the one that's next to it, and then how can that can be very disruptive to the whole thing, right? So if you don't take that into consideration, you end up in this pitfall of just having problems over problems. And I think that's relatable a little bit to the example you gave on your talk about Uber and how they just try to move to Indonesia but didn't consider those other connections, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Uber is not an isolated case, as I heard from some attendees mentioning that in their countries it also didn't work. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's also, as I said, hinting to one belief in my talk that your service is being used in the exact same way in every different ecosystem. And when you start working on that, you realize that it really isn't. And there are always nuances, there are always differences, and they might not be super apparent or they might not seem to be worth focusing on to start with. But then you get the Uber case where you try to implement and use a plug and play approach from one country to another, and that fails miserably because you didn't take these small considerations that add up into becoming a bigger problem, and you fail to see those, fail to take them in consideration, and that just leads to users being unhappy and going to a more local and familiar service
Yeah,
that understands their needs properly, also provides better language services. That having been said, I'm a huge advocate not to focus only on touchpoint translations, obviously, and on just doing some marketing around the new product being implemented in a different country. But
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, also in a way, if you think about it, it's a little bit hopeful scenario also because it creates opportunity for these smaller companies that are local to actually just grow and then create competition to these big corporations that are trying just to go to every single market all over the world.
Yeah, definitely. And then what's interesting is that these smaller services that start at a national level can end up expanding internationally. And what's then interesting to see is that they would expand to neighboring countries
Mhm.
quite often. And I haven't dived into that, so I'd be very curious to see how much they adapt to those new markets. But if there's cultural and geographic proximity, chances are that it might work a little bit better. So that is actually a phenomena that I know little about, but that I'd like to dive deeper into. But Bolt is a pretty good example of this, and
Yeah.
other ride-sharing companies that have thrived, for instance, in Eastern Europe or other Nordic countries where Uber didn't manage to implement themselves, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember very vividly when I was living in Portugal, for example, that they tried to bring the electric scooters to the city I was living, Coimbra. And after one company, I think only, after 1 month, they gave up. And then 2 years later, it was the biggest fever of all, like was everywhere. But all the other companies besides that first one that tried initially. So sometimes it's also the timing and how you do it that you end up missing the opportunity of getting that market.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you feel like it could come from other cultural influences, like other countries having developed it faster, and it takes time for it to trickle down to some other countries. So, like you say, it's a bit like finances, right? And the stock market, like timing the market, but who can predict when it's actually going to really work and when specifically? So,
Yeah,
yeah, too bad for these
yeah,
companies, but you got
yeah.
to
Some
try, I
people
guess.
still say that they can predict it, but I don't think that's so much
Yeah.
easy as people try to make it seems like. But generally, also like to know what are some of your other insights from other talks of the service design conference. Some things that really like sparked with either your own talk, but generally with some other topics that were discussed there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, my schedule was a little mad during the conference, so I unfortunately couldn't attend a lot. So I'm currently rewatching them, as we were discussing earlier. And the talk by Gaëlle Gela about sustainability was really interesting to me, but also because she was using examples of speculative design to show customers and clients how you could envision a better future. For certain products to become more sustainable. And I think for my case specifically, it's something I would love to investigate further because stakeholder buy-in is a complicated thing to do with novel topics that are seldomly developed or seldomly tackled. And I think a speculative approach can be really interesting to show this new future that we're trying to create for such a target audience or for such a service, and how that can play out in terms of return on investments, but also customer retention and so on. So I thought that talk was very interesting, and I'd love to, dive into these methods further. But I also really enjoyed Marie van Triche's talk on accessibility, and that is also because I knew very little on the topic myself, and I was lucky enough to be able to interview her for SDN during the conference. That taught me, I guess, basic things when you're into this discipline that I was not aware of, but that when you're deaf and you cannot, so the sign language will be very different from the written language that you see on screen. And I always assumed that those were kind of the same, or that the sign language was going to directly translate or be translatable in a written form, which apparently the two of them are fairly distinct and use a grammatical structure, if I understood correctly, that are different. So that was a
As she
pretty,
said on her talk, it was really most people that use sign language as their first language, then the spoken language of their country is the second language, right? So it's
yeah.
a full different perspective that you have to take into account when you're designing for those other groups also.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was very eye-opening and insightful and makes me want to investigate the topic further, even though at the start it was something that was I never really started thinking about. So I think that's also the beauty of this conference, bringing together so many voices from so many different background and problematics that make you look into new directions. So those were great.
Yeah, I think those are great. And I would say also that we have now the replay tickets going on. So if any of you want to see either Una's talk or the talks that we have been talking about, we are rewatching right now because we didn't have the time to watch it during the conference. So we're going to be there also watching the other talks. But also one that struck me quite a bit was the one on boldness from Stephen and Chris, just because I think a lot of times as service designers, we kind of, at least I feel, we're really trying to drive for the impact, for the social design, for the positive design and things like that. But sometimes along the process, we just and don't really continue kind of the process. And I think was interesting the way they ended also with kind of this big manifesto of everybody speaking out. Yes, let's try to be bold. Let's try to move a little bit away from our own assumptions and everything like that, and maybe try to create something that is different. And at least that was what I came to design for, right? I really was inspired by this type of talks. That was design is a bold profession, and we're trying to change things.
Yeah, I think I have yet to watch that talk. It's definitely on my list. So I'm glad you're giving a little teaser of it. But definitely. And I think also the hard balance to strike as a designer is to find the middle ground between pushing the boundaries, but also being realistic with whatever issue you're dealing with, whichever policymaker is you're speaking to. Because very often we hit that sort of boundary, and I think it's always interesting to find how we can jump above it and show what is possible beyond those very grounded and realistic approaches. Because if we stay under the realistic bar, we never really improve or reiterate on something new and different. So definitely very good point.
Yeah.
And did you have other talks that you were very interested in?
I mean, I haven't been able to watch so many yet, so I'll have to circle back to you next week, but then personally, because then we might be able to share a little bit more, both of us. But now, actually, we will open up for questions from the audience because they might have some other things that they were interested to know from you. And I actually have two questions here also, so that's great because sometimes we have to wait a little bit. So first, Katie, that she was asking, what are a couple of key takeaways from this complex topic that you can think about?
So I'm just gonna maybe ask to reframe the question. So the complex topic, is it
I
the one I
believe,
was addressed?
yeah, I believe it's about your cultural, like your talk on the cultural
My
biases.
talk. Yeah, I mean, I can rephrase the ones that I mentioned at the end of mine. So, I mean, my very first one was please remember to actually make sure you adapt your services to different cultural audiences, either because you're a local service expanding internationally or a local domestic service catering to an international pool of audience. Once you've managed to do that, don't adapt it on a surface level. So translation of touch points, as we mentioned, is not enough, and marketing or branding neither. And you want to make sure you speak to your users, but you also look at their countries of origins to try to understand what are the main gaps between what they might expect or how they're used to using the service you're focusing on and what your service is actually offering. And my last takeaway was to better work with that. I mean, service design is very much a team sport. I am always a huge advocate to work collectively with both local partners and people who come from other countries, because I think we can all get inspired worldwide by the way services are being handled in other countries. And having local partners is also invaluable to navigate the language barrier, but also understanding how the service you're focusing on is being dealt with within that specific country. Yeah, those would be more than couple, but three takeaways, I
Yeah,
think.
that works. That works. And also, Cosette Kosari, I hope I'm not butchering names. I always have this problem. But how do you handle cultural appropriation when you're designing user journeys?
Ooh, honestly, I don't think that I would have a good answer for that because I've never dealt with the problematic of cultural appropriation. I would actually be very eager to discuss this with Cosette and understand what she means or if she has examples about this, because I believe we're touching on a very different, maybe a little more sensitive topic that I have no pretension that I've ever worked on. So I'd rather
Mhm.
not, yeah,
Yeah.
dive into
But
that.
I think it's quite, and when I saw the question, I thought it was quite interesting, right? Because when we're trying to talk about um, trying to change the services for the cultural contexts, you have to be careful also not to do cultural appropriation and then just go and change it in a way that you're not really being. I don't even know how to put it, but but I mean, it's
Yeah,
quite a difficult thing. It's you have to be careful on both sides.
I guess, yeah, to avoid falling into like a service that is a stereotype of what a person from
Mm,
another culture might expect. Yeah, no, that is very true. And with the topic of culture comes a whole other set of themes and problematics that we need to be very wary of. But as I said, I don't have a lot of experience dealing with that, so I'd feel little out of depth when
yeah, but I think it
talking about
definitely
that.
sparks hopefully a new conversation that maybe we can have with Cosette later on.
Mm-mm,
So yeah,
absolutely.
to this point, we come more or less to the end of our time here. So
That went fast.
I'll thank you very much for coming, and then just ask if you have any like other suggestions or any other things that you would like to talk. It's okay if you don't. Also, I'm just opening it up.
No, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. This was loads of fun, and I'm actually surprised we're already at the end. And you're a great interviewer, so yeah, keep doing that. That will be my final comment.
Thank you. Okay, so see you soon.
See you. Bye.
And to everybody else that joined us today, thank you very much for listening to our amazing conversation here. I think is a very pertinent topic that, as we were saying, probably everybody had some type of problematics or some general problems when traveling or moving to a different country. So all this topic of cultural understanding is something that we really have to take into consideration as service designers. So hopefully it was a nice talk for everyone. And I hope to see you all next week when we have another community voice coming up. So thank you very much.